the names. So nice to see all the names popping up and the faces. Thank you for being here at our Buddhist community gathering. It's our 6th Buddhist community gathering from Vista Buddhist Temple. And we're located, our temple is located on Kumeyaay and Luiseno lands, unceded lands, also called San Diego, North San Diego County. And other folks are still arriving. We'll get started here in just a few moments. It's so wonderful to see you all. It feels really good. So thank you for being here. My name is Judy Nakatomi, and I use she and her and sometimes we pronouns to honor my ancestors. I'm a member of Vista Buddhist Temple, and we are navigating the mud of our times. Mud in Buddhism, as many of you know, is a metaphor for suffering or the struggles of life's circumstances. And the lotus flower grows because of the mud. The lotus represents enlightenment and the end of suffering, or true liberation. This year, we were very cognizant of world events, climate events, election anxiety, and how we bear witness to our times as practitioners of the Buddha path. We, the organizers and the teachers, were very intentional as we collaborated with each one of the Dharma teachers of how to name our Buddhist community gathering. Navigating the mud, using skillful effort responsibly as we meet unsettled times. We are happy and so grateful to have Reverend Lien, Shutt, Sister Peace, and Reverend Melissa Opel to share the Dharma with us today. And there are a variety of strong emotions as we come off the general election in our country, numerous wars, climate change, to name a few. Fear, anger, confusion, and disappointment are just a few of emotions shared with us the past 4 days. So we ask you today to take good care of yourselves during our short time together. Take a standing break or a sitting break. Have a cozy place to listen, and perhaps have some water or tea or a snack nearby. Please remember there are tender hearts present, and please hold our hearts and yours with wisdom and compassion. I will keep the introductions brief because we wish to have ample time for our wonderful teachers and for a panel discussion followed by some Q&A. And there will be a short break after the 3 Dharma teachers have spoken today of about 5 minutes for us to stretch and take a bio break. In the Jodo Shinshu tradition, of which Vista Buddhist Temple is a member, we gasho. We put our hands, our palms together and bow. Bow in gratitude and reverence with wisdom and compassion. I invite you to put your hands together as an option and bowing gently in gratitude and reverence. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. Our first teacher today is Reverend Lien Shutt, a Dharma teacher and lineage holder in the Shinryu Suzuki tradition. Their trainings are in the Insight and Soto Zen traditions. Reverend Lien was born to a Buddhist family in Vietnam. And as a side note, their current book is one I highly recommend, called Home is Here, Practicing Anti-Racism with the Engaged Eightfold Path. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Lien.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you to the temple and for the invitation in this event. And I'm so honored to be here with you all and with the other two amazing teachers. And yeah, as we came on earlier to get ready, we shared a little bit, I did a check-in, and I have to say that I'm really feeling tender. And a lot of it is that I know that this is a community, even though I don't know you all, and yet as Buddhists, as practitioners, our effort is to be present with things as they are. And that's right now, for many of us, super difficult and challenging and heavy. And part of that for me is just being really real with each other. And so I had many ideas about how to start this in a way that would be supportive to us all. And I have settled on offering this reflection. You can do it as a meditation. That's what I'll offer. And it's actually a writing reflection also. So let's go ahead and do that just for a few minutes. I'm going to ring my bell 3 times to start and once to end. It'll just be brief. All right, just take a few moments to settle, whatever posture, standing, sitting, walking or lying down, a way that gives you a sense of groundedness and stability. Coming into the posture or the breath, if those are your anchor points. This week I also use my mala a lot, so that might be useful. And this is a practice from the book on skillful effort, and it is called the investigation of fear. I know that's up for many of us right now. I'm going to offer you a few questions and some ways of being with and investigating fear. And please be gentle with yourself, shifting if you need to, taking in what works right now, leaving what doesn't, attending to yourself and each other here. Identify an ongoing or recurring fear that you have right now. Take a deep breath. Does this fear or anxiety, as how it's showing up, or rage, have validity in this moment, right now? Or is it a drive from, say, habitual vigilance that's taking your energy away from being present for yourself right here and right now? If it is, note that. It's not a bad thing. We're going to be having a hard time concentrating, focusing. Awareness is the key here. I offer some ways to be present or to come back. And again, the effort is tenderness, caretaking, loving. So how do you attend to this wish to leave? Is it to take a deeper breath? Is it to ground yourself? Is it to say a mantra? What helps to just come back? And how do you come back? How does it really feel in the body? The body is always present. So when we're paying attention, bringing our focus onto a body point, especially one that feels supportive or caring, perhaps touching your heart space or touching the earth like the Buddha did for support. If you're in a chair, I like to grip my toes. So you can ask yourself, what I'm experiencing right now, is it something I do need to attend to right now? I'm asking you in some ways, and also if it's not, that's okay. Knowing that it's not, perhaps something you can wait for later. So this sense of titrating or regulating is really important. You can say no. You can decide if it feels safe. This can be also when we're off the cushion and interacting. In a way, this is an opportunity to remind yourself. When fear, anxiety, rage comes up, how does it land? Is it useful to be with it as it is right now? Can you wait? Can you say no? Do you feel safe? What is the appropriate response? Is it to protect? Is it to be open? So you have a sense of agency, sense of volition. Then also, how can you feel connected? For instance, taking deep breaths, gripping your toes, touching the earth, your heart, remembering a loved one or community. All right, deep breaths. There you go. All right. So I know that a lot of fear is up, and for many of us, there's a lot of past events that we know from experience and really validates our fear and our anxiety. And our practice is to, in many ways, how to find a sense of equanimity or settledness with it. And so I will say, I'm in the Soto Zen tradition, which is, we know our Buddha nature. We sit facing a wall, we sit and we just be with things as they are. And yet that's very hard when things are tumultuous and unsettled. And that's why I interweave insight practices. So the book is on the Eightfold Path, which in the Theravada tradition are the skillful view or understanding of Four Noble Truths and karma. skillful thinking, which I actually say is skillful motivation, because thinking is always purposeful. And while there are 8 of them, they're broken up into 3 sections. So that section is called the wisdom section. And that takes us right into classically what's called the ethical conduct. I like to call it the compassionate connection, because it's the interactive part, which is skillful speech, skillful action, and skillful livelihood. I will say, as a Kyra Duolingo said, I've rearranged the furniture a little bit in the book, and I also renamed things just to point towards a little more. So I like to call skillful action skillful enactment, because there's the vow. It's very much about the precepts. And then the third aspect, or the third grouping, is called the meditative factors. And one of my teachers, Gil Fronsdal, says is actually, you could think of it as emotional and mental development. So that's skillful effort, skillful mindfulness, and skillful concentration. And in the book, they're more interspersed with things. So today, again, with a sense of the election, to come up with this. And in the Theravada tradition, there are 4 ways to work with skillful effort. And a lot of it has to do with, it's the first of the meditative, because for many of us, we think of it as action, but in Buddhism, for me, it in a way is much more about what is the energy and watching your habitual energy. And in the Eightfold Path, it is on the 5 hindrances: sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness, anxiety, and skeptical doubt. I'm not going to go into those parts so much. I'm going to go more into the instructions of how to work with them. So there are 4 of them. And they're useful to memorize. So I made up an acronym, not too far from the classic teaching. So they're called PACE, P-A-C-E. I also like it. Since English is my second language, I'm always looking up relating to words. So pace, when you pace yourself, is you're doing something to avoid overexertion or to maintain stamina. So I think that's something that we can all use right now. And so here are while there are 4 of them, they're very much put into 2 categories of what's classically labeled as unwholesome and wholesome. I like to say unskillful, or up here it should be unuseful and appropriate. Those are just other ways that that might be useful. So P is for prevent the unwholesome or the unskillful from arising. A is to abandon them once they have arisen. And then when they're wholesome or skillful, you want to cultivate their arising. That's a C. And the E is to extend them when they are here. So there's a real beauty to that. And I also want to point out that, to me, you might think, wow, why are they unskillful first? I think as a restorative point, that that's a really useful way to frame it. Because in restoration, we have to agree on what is broken or torn, as many of us are feeling right now, perhaps. And so, yeah, so in terms of practice, again, it's mostly towards concentration as you go into the meditative factors. So these are things that keep you away from focusing. And I know that the day after the election, I have a really hard time concentrating, forgetful, losing place. So I want to really talk about, so maybe for most of us, we think, well, prevent from arising, especially maybe right now thinking about our fears. And for me, I think fear is often what underlies a lot. The other thing that many of us are talking about right now is grief. And so I noticed that when I really focus on my grief, it feels so big and solid. And so the way that we can, I think, try to really meet it is to kind of lean in and investigate a little bit more. And I was talking with another teacher, and we were thinking a lot about how grief is a sense of loss right? Grief is the process of dealing with loss. And as I was trying to make sense of this last week, I will say that I thought of something because it felt like, the fear of how the election turned out, and from my point of view, was there, but the result seems so like inconceivable. The extent of what seems like the result of, still to be determined how much of that is wise swept or not. And so the thing I thought about is that how our practice is to stay connected. And I know that in 2016, I thought if I was really brave, I used to live near Civic Center of San Francisco. So I would take 2 chairs and go sit in the Civic Center and just say, I'm here to talk to everyone, including, people I might have a difficult time with, and that I would just stay open and have conversation, because I do really have the belief and confidence that staying connected, in fact, separation is the ultimate suffering, how we think we're separate from each other. I will confess that I've never done that. And yet the idea really is, where's the sense that we might share something in common? I think that's really useful to keep in mind. And so this week I thought, wow, part of what my understanding of so much of people who may not have voted like me are struggling with is the sense of not knowing, the sense of, wow, the world, in our country in particular, is not happening the way that I would like it to, and would affect me in a way that supports my life. And even though I might disagree with the view of how that is, I thought, wow, I'm experiencing that, the sense of like, what is this world? And so that's the commonality. However, for me, the big difference is that the response when we're discombobulated and when things are not going our way is different. And whereas there's what I see that's troubling for me is the response to not knowing is hatred and violence and harm. And in our practice in Buddhism, our response is to have compassion, to have goodwill, and to be not harmful, right? So I think the how is the important part, not the what so much. Certainly the what is important. If we remember the how, the motivation of what we're doing, that becomes kind of like the fulcrum or your compass, right? So in terms of preventing the unwholesome from arising, my first thought would be, oh, I don't want to be around those people, or I don't want to be around that. How can I prevent myself from certain situation? And yet, as we know, it's hard to do so. So I think more, in a way, this here is to talk about how is it that we can be present for what is. So I'm going to focus a little bit more on ourselves and what we can do. So I think for me, a lot of my prevention is, again, to not have those thoughts of ways that make me feel more separate from others and how we're different and how they might harm me. So the other thing is, I think for those of us who've been in trauma, be it personal or generational or cultural or community, real and present and past, but certainly our past informs. So in trauma work, we always talk about how are we in present time, and we want to be really clear that we want to be in present time. And this is where our practice is so useful to help us be present. And the body is always present. So when you can pay attention to your breath, or to how you're holding yourself, how you're, are you scrunched up? Are you open? Is there a time when you feel like you're scrunched up? And like in this thing, in some ways, when I think about the result, I might want to go like this, but here I'm remembering now I'm in community of, heart-minded, if not like-minded people. So then I'm going to try to let myself know. I think it's so important for those who, again, experiencing trauma. It's so body-based that the more we can give ourselves a sense of openness and a sense of being okay with how we are in our body, if nothing else, that's really important. So my thing would be more, how can you prevent yourself from your habitual ways of reacting to difficulty? And I know I tend to isolate, I tend to have catastrophic thinking. So perhaps how do you prevent yourself from that? So when it has arisen, how do you abandon it, right? So I know that right now, I've been saying to my students, like, lean into your practices. I think sometimes we forget, and it seems hard. So the other thing though is remember the other kinds of practices that you do. Like this week, response to the pandemic. Oh, sorry. Feels like a pandemic. I've said that word twice now this week, but it feels like another kind of pandemic. Is to remember other parts of our practice. Like in Soto Zen, we sit still to be with things as they are, but we also chant. We also have walking meditation. So we chant the Enmei Chuku Kanengyo, this calling on Avalokiteshvara or Kanan or the Bodhisattva compassion to support us. So doing that, expanding your practices, it helps. Oh, I was also talking, about how I use my mala beads, and for many, many years, I do metta phrases with them. And this week, I've just been, not even with the words, just the feeling now helps me a lot. So that's one. So when skillful is present or wholesome, and when we want that, we want to cultivate that, right? So again, I think non-isolation is really big right now, and I was really, really taken by how this week there were so many responses in the different communities that I teach with, through the messages about this event or that event, and a real sense of community. Yeah. So I think doing that is really helpful. And I want to invite people to go ahead and add your own right now. So I already talked about how to prevent unskillful, how to abandon it when it's arisen. Thank you. So go ahead and add that into chat. If people can put things in chat, maybe someone could prevent one of the moderators, and then people could add and then abandon. And we're on cultivate now. Actually, let's just go with cultivate since I'm talking about it, and you can do the other stuff later. Let's be in real time right now. So let's cultivate. What are ways that you cultivate skillful or wholesome things right now? And I also want to say that cultivation here can be what you think is unskillful at first. I was talking with someone this week, and this past week, and they were like, I'm doing emotional eating right now, and I'm aware of that. And I said, oh, that's good, because what's important is, you're aware of it. And I said, another thing I might suggest is, you're doing it to self-soothe, probably. And they were like, yeah. I said, so just notice when you've reached the self-soothing, right? So it's okay, we're going to distract ourselves anyway, because we can't just, this week it's so hard to just, this is not the week to lean into the practice of like being with the difficulty and investigating it until it is gone kind of practice. It's very much like tenderness, caretaking, awareness. So I want to really thank you. Yeah, walking outside, that's a great way, nature. So cultivate. And then when it is present, how do we extend that? So the big thing I always say is when you've done a practice, rest in the result. Rest in the result. That's a great way of extending. Also extend what you wouldn't usually do, right? So I think that's useful. I know I've done a lot more walking meditation this week. I've done a lot more of chanting, to be honest, than I have regularly. I love to sit, so that's my go-to. So this week I've kind of extended it. All right, I hope that's been helpful. Just a few tools. Thank you very much. Appreciation for you all.
Thank you so much, Reverend Lien. Thank you for your practice and for your skillful and wise words. I'd like to take a moment now to introduce our next teacher, Dharma teacher and Sangha friend, Sister Peace. Sister Peace is a monastic Dharma teacher who received the lamp transmission in the Plum Village Zen tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh. And just a personal note, yesterday we had an opportunity to check in, Sister Peace and I. And I'm just going to be honest, it was not an easy conversation because there were a lot of shared strong emotions that were present. And so Sister Peace shared that this is going to be an off-script kind of talk, that tears may flow with the need to be brutally honest of the weight of this moment for her. And one of the things I remember Sister Peace saying was the best way to heal is with honesty, including the discomfort and weight of this moment. And with that, we remind you, dear friends, with us online and perhaps listening to the recording later, as you listen, to be connected to your breath and body. And just as Reverend Lien was suggesting and reminding us earlier, to be connected with your breath and body. So please join me in welcoming Sister Peace.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Reverend Shutt. As Judy said, it has been a very tough week. I know not only for me, but for many others. And I know that my voice will waver and already the tears are coming. But I also thought that the best offering I could give would be the most genuine. And I'm so grateful that we have our beloved Reverends Shutt and Opel with us today as well. So I just want to let you know that this offering is coming from the mud. The mud I feel like I've been standing in, not just all week, but realizing, wow, I've been in this mud longer than a week. And I know that the healing that I've gotten, as I've shared with friends during the week, I hope that sharing it today may offer a window into some healing you may, in fact, experience. Originally, I was prepared to share with you about the first time I got personally involved in politics many years ago, and maybe I can share that with you later, and how that actually brought me to the practice. But I realized as the fear, I mean, there was anger too, but for me, there was more fear, clouded, my perceptions this week that I needed to do something different. And I realized that as I trusted had to trust in the practice and in the Sangha. I had less fear as I shared with one here or one there. And alternatively, the more I feared, the less I trusted. So I'm trusting you today and coming to you today and sharing my mud. In this very moment, I feel like tears are locked in my heart. And as I've been able to unlock some, I've been able to meet some of my fears, and they've started to subside. And let me say, too, that it's not just the fears of this week, but so interesting. What has also tumbled forward have been other fears that I've been holding. As I shared a little bit earlier with the group, I've had a lot of grief and loss in family. I've struggled with my body as a result of 35 or 40 trips in the past 2 years. And the fears about what my body's feeling like and doing what I need to do to take care of it. But, and that's just an example of realizing that these fears and angst and grief were all there. And then there's one more layer. And though I'm ungrateful for, I shouldn't say ungrateful, though I'm saddened by the results of this week, I'm being shown that the mud that this has brought up for me has actually been a gift. And I had a vision about my tears being locked in my heart. And that fear was on the other side of the door, barring them from coming out. But looking more deeply, I realized the lock was not outside of my heart, but the lock was inside. And only the release and the embrace through tears is what would help to set me free. And the door could swing open. So how could I take care of myself? Realizing sharing with friends and Sangha like you today. Number one, medicine. Number one thing to help my little sprout of lotus reach the top of the water where there's air and sun and where it can bloom. So I've been not so much returning to, but really, as Reverend Shutt said, just coming back to basic practice. Walking meditation on the earth. Fortunately for me, 5 minutes from the Mississippi River. And just saying that starts me to quake a little bit. Breathing, remembering to breathe. Acknowledging my deep disappointment, my anger, and my fear. And sometimes what I've put into practice, something that our teacher, Ty, taught us, he says, sometimes our body is like a house. And when you're in the house and there's too much sun, what do? Or too much rain, looks gloomy. We close the blinds, right? And I realized I needed to protect myself and my senses. I needed to protect what I saw, what I heard. Interestingly enough, our senses, our sense of nose or taste, touch, and mind. And so I had to close those senses off by gifting myself with the imposition of news. Uh, as much as once I knew the outcome, I realized, oh, I can't take anything else in right now. I need to take care of me. And in order to do that, I had to close things off. And I've let a few things in, but very selectively, knowing what I was going to hear. And I don't feel like my head's in the sand. I'm not, I'm trying to not be with something. But in fact, it has made me more acutely aware because it hasn't pulled me outside of myself. It has helped me to stay with what's right here, with right now, and being able to slowly inch back and allowing in things that make me feel better. Interestingly, as a result of a lot of the grief that I've experienced, I took up the habit of making pot holders like I did as a little girl. I don't know if y'all remember that. Because I said to myself during this year of grief from my sister and 4 other relatives, what can I do? And my hands, through which flows much out in help, also means I have to be open for what through my hands can come in to heal. And for me, that was the simple act of weaving a pot holder. I can't really explain it. It's tactile, it's somatic, it's so many different things. But, and the one that I designed this time had knots in it. You can actually put knots in it. And I tied 6 knots. I don't know why 6. I just thought it was artistic. But just a reminder, I wasn't escaping those knots. Oh, no. Here they are. How do they weave into the fabric of life? And some of the other things I did, one was I wrote a list. I wrote a list of the people I knew who knew me and loved me unconditionally. And some of those people I've talked to, some of them I haven't, but it's okay. Because fear can somehow make you feel you're not worthy. But I know that I am. And that little list, it was 8 or 10 names. I could have put many more, but I just needed something that I could actively see to know I'm not alone. And this is another example of not being alone. And knowing that not only those friends are there, but you, and as you represent Sangha. And that is trust. And that's something I didn't have to fear, was not going to be there. Because Sangha is always there. And not having to navigate these things alone makes things less heavy, right? And I know that this burden, what I feel, I'm using fear, but you could fill in the blank, is not only my burden. It's the burden of many of us, but I also know that all of us here and so many more are bearers of light that will keep the light alive that I feared for a couple of days might be snuffed out. Because in this world of duality, we can't see the darkness unless there is light. And I'm remembered when I spent a few years at the Magnolia Grove Monastery in Batesville, Mississippi. Ty had the brilliant idea of having a statue created with himself and Dr. King. And I tell you, on many occasions, I did walking meditation to that statue to seek refuge. And I look at these statues that were, of course, larger than life, but I also realized not larger than their lives. And I would say, how did you do it? I'd refer to them as a little irreverently as the boys. Guys, boys, how did you do it? And the answer was there in their hands, in the scroll, which was engraved. Building beloved community is the most noble task. They did nothing individually. They did it with their respective sanghas. One walking for peace, one walking for civil rights, both walking for human rights. And as I said a little bit earlier, that it wasn't just this fear, it was fear of a life, I think, well lived and beautifully lived, and at the stage of life where loss happens much more than it does, say, 20 or 30 years ago. But yet, sharing this with you and others, it's been an opportunity to release a lot of that. I felt more calm, especially after making the decision to come to you with just what is. Because, I've also realized that there's no space for fear. When a heart cracks open with light, with tears, with love, fear cannot enter that space. I know I still have a lot of work to do, but I feel very, I'm going to say energized in terms of energized by heart to do as much as I can to not only help to heal myself, and this is not going to be an overnight thing, but helping others. We all together helping each other and helping others. And coming to terms with the fact that realizing things have fundamentally changed. What I thought would be a different, say, 20 years, the rest of my life, is something else. And I can't honestly say that is okay, but I can say that I will accept it more and more easily. And I know that with what I'm practicing at this moment and what I'll be practicing in moments to come will be more tears, perhaps more fear, more anger, but also more deep joy, more recognition of light, and the many lotuses that will grow in my heart and in yours.
Thank you so much, Sister Peace. Thank you for your presence and your honesty this afternoon. Before we go to our next speaker, maybe we can just take a couple of breaths here.
Maybe a sound of a bell, Judy.
Certainly. Thank you, friends. I'd like to introduce our next teacher and Dharma teacher and speaker today. I'd like to welcome Reverend Melissa Opel. Reverend Melissa Opel is a resident minister at the Buddhist Church of San Francisco in the Shin Buddhist tradition, of which Vista Buddhist Temple is also a member. And interesting thing about the Buddhist Church of San Francisco is the oldest Shin temple in the United States. And this year they're celebrating their 125th anniversary. Which, thank you. It is very exciting to note that Buddhism did not arrive here in the 1970s. It's been around in the U.S. for quite a long time, through many veins and countries and cultures. Reverend Opel brings a fresh perspective to the Pure Land Jodo Shinshu tradition, in my opinion, as we, in the Shin Buddhist tradition that originated in Japan, celebrates another big anniversary this year, 850 years. And that's also really exciting because Reverend Melissa Opel has been assigned to the oldest temple in this country. So we did a little bit of training together years ago, Buddhist training together, and I always remember those first Dharma talks that we were judged in giving was just her fresh approach, and I really felt like just that sense, the feeling of an ally in you in a place that sometimes can be steeped in patriarchy, I'll just put it that way. And to have that fresh sense of this person coming up through the ranks of this tradition excites me beyond words. So please join me in welcoming Reverend Opel.
Thank you, Judy, for those kind words. Yeah, it's always fun to remember our early training days together, and it's a joyful memory. Following Sister Peace's very honest and very raw talk with us, I want to kind of bookend mine here or preface it with an intent to purposely try to have some maybe reframing, some optimism. But even as I give this talk, that optimism is, this talk is just as much for me to hear for myself. And so I hope that we can take something away from that is helpful for us. And so, thank you for everybody for joining us today. Thank you to the Vista Buddhist Temple for having the three of us here to share our perspective of navigating the mud and using skillful effort responsibly as we meet these unsettling times. And so, as Judy said, I represent Jodo Shinshu, a Pure Land tradition rooted under the Mahayana umbrella. Our path of practice is about coming to truly know oneself through deep listening and the recitation of the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, which means I take refuge in the Buddha of wisdom and compassion. The symbolism or metaphor of Amida Buddha puts us deeply in touch with the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha and reminds us that we are embraced just as we are. This reliance on the name without doubt settles us into the embrace of the teachings and reveals a way to attain liberation from this Saha world. Our founder, Shinran Shonin, who shared the Nembutsu understanding so that all who desired release from this world filled with the three poisons of greed, anger, and ignorance, had a path of practice available to them. And he said, even when the world is filled with a great fire, pass through it and seek to hear the Dharma. Then you will unfailingly become a world-honored one and free all beings from birth, aging, and death. The short verse reminds us of the urgency in which we need to seek the Dharma and the difficulties we will encounter each day. Perhaps this last week has found many of you feeling unsettled with a deep desire to quickly protect those who are weaker than yourself, to wonder how the changes ahead will affect you, your friends, family, and this country. Even if somehow you were not rattled by the election, we still contend with climate change, gun violence, racism.
We could retire right now if we wanted to live like that.
Keep going. I'm not sure what's going on there. And discord between our neighbors and fellow countrymen, to name a few of the large issues that are in front of us. They can cause great disharmony within ourselves and our sanghas. We feel these outer burdens and they combine with our own dissatisfaction from our daily life. Whether we are battling relationship issues, work, stress, economic hardship, or the many sufferings we encounter, the ability to see the urgency of a fire lessens. And instead we feel bogged down and stuck as if we're trying to navigate the world through mud. As humans, we assign value and judgment to people, places, and things. We do our best to filter these judgments through a Buddhist lens as we understand the teachings and how they are part of our life. And often we view mud as a negative, something that slows us down, is difficult to move through, and is dirty and wet. It is often cold and can be sticky. When navigating mud, it can pull at our shoes and fill them with the oozy, slippery mixture, making it even more difficult. When we look at mud as something to conquer, we can encounter it with a mindset of disdain or irritation, becoming unnerved by its presence. Right effort, however, is part of the mental development practices. Right effort asks us to delve deeper into our practices and to regard deeper our words and actions. Shinran Shonin directs our right effort into passing through our obstacles and listening deeply to the Dharma. When I encounter mud in the same way I encounter the Nembutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, how it encounters me, I can begin to accept mud for exactly what it is, just as I am accepted, just as I am. The mud, like us, has its own set of causes and conditions that formed it and placed it in our path. The mud is not there to be conquered, but to be appreciated for exactly what it is, to open our eyes and allow us to experience it through appreciation and acceptance, maybe even gratitude. Mud is made of three components: dirt, water, and clay. Depending on the amount of each of these components will result in the type of mud we have. If the mud has more water, it's thinner and less sticky. The amount of clay that is present determines how sticky that mud will be. It may keep us in the same place longer, but if we have enough clay, it can support us walking through it when we do so in a steady, determined pace. I'm sure most of you know, as Judy said at the beginning, that mud is what lotus flowers bloom and thrive through, is a metaphor that reminds us of the beauty that can come from such difficult substance. Knowing that something so lovely and meaningful comes to us in this way, we can then ask if there's a different way to think about mud and what it means to us as Buddhists. How do we learn to view mud as a necessary component for life and beauty to spring forth from? If mud is made from the three components of dirt, water, and clay, how can we view each of these? One way to consider it is to think of the dirt as the three poisons of greed, anger, and ignorance. As long as we are part of this world, dirt will always be present. It is present in us and it is present in others. This is what the Buddha teaches us about the nature of the human life. The water, then, is like the teachings. It is pure and clean, free of any defilements, and always levels itself out. Because the water comes to us in our suffering, our dirt, it will always make a murky mixture that we cannot see clearly through. Although we may be able to add enough water that the visibility increases, it is only through liberation, the cessation of our defilements, that we will be able to be surrounded by the perfectly clear water. And the clay is our practice. Clay is what makes the mud, mud. It is what makes the mud usable and transforms the murky water. Mud is used for many, many different things and supports us in ways we often forget. Mud is used as a cooling agent and blocks the skin from the sun. Animals of all kinds use it to bring their temperature down and to protect themselves from burning. Mud helps hold things together. It can be made into bricks and homes and used to create nests and other places of protection. Butterflies use mud to receive its minerals and nourish themselves, and bats ingest mud to balance out the citrus they consume through fruit. Mud allows worms to move above ground quicker without drying out, and we humans use it in spa treatments as well as for detoxification. Mud has been used in positive ways for thousands of years, and even kids and dogs enjoy playing in it. When we look at mud more closely, we can see the tracks of animals or how the water comes to the surface and moves through it, creating its own path and grooves, moving unencumbered, just as the Dharma moves where it will and emerges where it will, waiting for us to take notice, to appreciate, and to engage. When we consider mud in this way, it doesn't seem so bad at all. The presence of the mud can show us the work that is happening and that we are engaging in. We're helping to make sense of the way in which we long for a true understanding of wisdom and compassion, afoot in both the world of nirvana and the human realm. The mud supports us, but also reminds us how precarious this life is that we are living. The mud is something we have not only encountered, it is something that we experience often, if not every day. This means that we have experience in moving through muddy waters, no matter how easy or difficult it is. A couple of years ago, Giannis Antetokounmpo, better known as the 7-foot forward of the Milwaukee Bucks, who is lovingly called the Greek Freak, was asked in an interview after the Bucks lost early in the playoff season if the whole season was a failure. What he says is it's the wrong question. We often look at our outcomes as positive or negative, good or bad. Although he was talking about sports and that there is no failure in sports, I have tweaked a couple of his words to make it relevant to us today. There's no failure in life. There's good days and bad days. Some days you're able to be successful and some days you're not. Some days it's your turn and some days it's not your turn. And that's what life is about. You don't always win. And when he goes on to talk about is that even when things don't end the way we want, it doesn't mean we stop trying. We get up and try again, and we work towards a goal, to build something. We're trying to move towards liberation for ourselves and liberation for others. We can easily fall into the mental trap of believing obstacles are something standing in our way, and that it is a waste of time to encounter them. And especially if we have to come back to them over and over again, we can feel some type of failure, either that we have failed or others have failed us. As a member of the LGBTQI+ community, I would be denying my feelings if I said I didn't feel worried over not only my rights, but especially transgender and transgender youth with the upcoming administration. And I would not be honest with myself if I said I wasn't worried for my Sangha, which is mostly comprised of Japanese Americans. I'm holding many worries because those worries are based on a past experience. Although my mind can create and inflate worries, what the mud of it all is revealing to me is how much I care for those around me and how deeply I want them to be free of fear and difficulties. But I also feel betrayed by friends and family who voted in opposition to protect our most vulnerable. The day after election, I was fortunate enough to be teaching our Kyoshi class, those who are working towards complete ordination to get their teaching certificate. I was teaching about diversity, equity, and discrimination. It could not have been better timed for me. It pulled me out of my sorrow and placed me firmly in the teachings and how we want to include all peoples in our community while remaining deeply invested in those who are here. It was a healing time and one that reassured me of the work I was doing as a minister and Buddhist practitioner. It is my practice that I found the assurance and the soothing, calming coolness of the mud. One of my favorite books, The Essential Shinran, states, contemplation of the Nembutsu opens our spiritual eyes to all-embracing reality, who surrounds, permeates, and is one with our limited fragment of passionate life. While we ourselves as foolish beings cannot say that we have the qualities of a Buddha, true entrusting awakens us to our true self and our potentiality to contribute positively to the world and societies as bearers of compassion and wisdom, which are the essence of Buddhahood. As Buddhist practitioners, we can be bearers of compassion and wisdom, but we must stay grounded in our practice in order to allow the teachings to come forward and my foolish nature to step back, if even for a moment. We have to invest in our practices and a space to gain experience, to build towards something greater than ourselves. The time will not be wasted. Instead, we are building experience. All of the ritual we do, like offering incense, chanting the sutras, listening to the Dharma, it may not feel like what we need right this moment. We can get too wrapped up in worry and our emotions. We live in a world where we are faced with many challenges, but if we learn to train our ear to hear the calling voice of Amida Buddha, we find that we are embraced and cared for, and we can begin to put our experiences in perspective, to see ourselves and others as we truly are. And we can slowly become more like the Buddhas who embraces all and not focus on conquering our difficulties at all, but instead how to move through them with compassion and wisdom. Instead of asking our other Buddhist friends how they are coping, maybe we can ask, how are your practices supporting you right now during this time of uncertainty? What are the practices you are finding the most soothing right now? How are you turning the mud into a detoxification? If we find ourselves compelled to engage in advocacy work and interventions to be a safe space, how am I going to make sure I am rejuvenated through my practice? Returning to the opening teaching I shared, even when the world is filled with a great fire, pass through it and seek to hear the Dharma. Then you will unfailingly become a world-honored one and free all beings from birth, aging, and death. I'm reminded that when I think life is going my way and I do not see the obstacles in front of me, I do not see the world through mud or fire. I can forget to engage and become wrapped up in the day-to-day minutia. I stop leaning on my practice to keep me aware, to rely on the Nembutsu instead of my own leanings, to engage in right effort, to be diligent. Although we see great difficulties on the horizon, when we recenter ourselves and return to the Buddha's teachings, we are reminded that there are always great difficulties on the horizon. And though our heart aches to assist others and to keep them safe, it is when we return to our practice and diligently seek liberation that we work to emancipate our fellow beings, to make lasting changes. The mud brings us back, slows us down so that we can see the fire that is blazing around us. In this way, it is a gift to encounter. It is when we are certain that we have become too complacent, so uncertainty brings us back. Grief, sadness, and uncertainty are emotions we are not always comfortable with. We have a tendency to want to solve problems for ourselves and for others. Renyo Shonin, the 8th head of our school, said, upon seeing the truth, our feelings will bend. And for us, the truth is the Nembutsu, and for you, it is the practices you find in your traditions. It is the medicine to our suffering. The Nembutsu in your practice is with us always when we are wrapped up in trappings of life. Reciting the Nembutsu or leading into our practices, leaning into right effort, we can be a reminder to us to reframe the difficulties we encounter. Saying Namo Amida Butsu over and over again can pull us out of our perspective and remind us of how we are embraced by the wisdom and compassion of the Buddha, of the teachings. And reciting the Nembutsu over and over again can remind us to think of others and to offer the hand of peace we experience in our life in those pockets. Gratitude is not always easy to feel or to remember, especially when we are in the throes of pain and anguish. We can show kindness to ourselves by returning to our practice. We can show kindness to others, and there will be times that those things will not feel like enough, and that is okay, as long as we don't forget that even these times will pass, just like the rain passes, just like the mud dries up, and just like the sun rises and sets each day. All is not lost in these times, and when we endure through it, the other side will come, and then we were able to look back with a new set of eyes, a new perspective, and Namo Amida Butsu, our practice, will come just a bit easier. We do nothing in this world alone, and may we always remember to support each other and ourselves, just as the kind and compassionate Buddha supports us. Thank you.
I'd like to invite the sound of the bell. Thank you for your practice, Reverend Opel. We're going to take a short break here, and thank you to all three of our teachers. I just want to intersperse something that I shared when we were first meeting and gathering and organizing this Buddhist community gathering. We got really excited after our first meeting with the teachers, and we felt like dancing. We felt like we had the best team. The best team of teachers, and I'm really feeling that right now. I'm feeling this sense of joy amidst the mud and the detoxification of the mud, and the beauty of Sangha, the nourishment and the rejuvenation that's possible in our Sangha. So dear friends, we'll take a little break now. It's about 13 minutes after the hour, so maybe we'll come back at 20 after. Does that sound good to all of you? And then we'll have time for a panel, and Casey Materme will be facilitating that. Thank you, dear ones. Thank you all so much for slowly transitioning back from your break. I hope you were able to take a few moments to maybe grab some water or tea. My name is Casey Madume. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am very honored to get to facilitate this next part of our Buddhist community gathering. I'm going to add our 3 Dharma teachers back and spotlight them to join me on the screen. And so this next part we thought would be a little bit more unscripted and more casual and give our 3 Dharma teachers an opportunity to engage with each other. And if you have questions about maybe each other's sharings earlier, or if you wanted to dive into a specific topic, I invite you to unmute yourselves, and I will insert some questions as needed from everyone who submitted questions during the initial registration. And I know we're getting a couple of questions in the chat. So first, I just wanted to open it and invite the 3 of you to engage in some conversation with each other. Thank you.
We all got shy so quickly.
I want to offer something in terms of gratitude for Reverend Opel and reminding us of the beautiful gift of mud here on this planet called Earth, and that it is nurturing, it is healing, it's life-giving, it's all of those things. And I'm deeply appreciative of being reminded of that. I know in our traditions, mud, because most of us somehow come to find mud or rain or anything less than, sunny rays to be not a great condition of weather. But I am really appreciative, and it gives me a whole different perspective of imagining the lotus moving through the mud, not because it's tough, but because it's love. It's what they need. The lotus needs to grow and gives it the strength to push through the water, again, not negative, until it reaches the top. And so thank you. I really appreciate that that very different perspective.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think that that's that aspect of it too, right? Is it's not to say that the lotus's journey isn't difficult, right? But this is how it comes out when it's done, because it has gone through those difficulties and has taken in that nourishment. And I think that that's how the Dharma transforms us. It nourishes us so that we can keep becoming, new lotuses, brighter lotuses, bigger lotuses for the world. And it doesn't mean the struggle is easy. Yeah. And some of the conditions are more difficult in our current country for some folks than it is for others. And I think that we have to recognize that as well.
If did you want to say something?
No, please, first.
I was just going to share on the subject of mud. When I was in Alaska, and there is a community there at the tip, the name of which is leaving me at the moment, but maybe someone would know. And it's on a spit. It's called the Homer Spit. And when I saw this very long, 4 or 5 miles into the inlet, not very wide land, I was curious, like, what is that? And how did that get there? And our tour guide, the Sangha, the Dharma teacher who was heading up the retreats we were going to be with, said, "Oh, that spit is formed over millions of years. The way that happens is that glaciers, millennia ago, before they receded to where they are now, they were pushing forward And under the sea, you know, they were pushing the mud, the mud, the mud, the clay, the clay. And over millennia, I imagine it being like a big giant caterpillar, just lifting that mud up and up and up, and over millennia, suddenly bursting through the top of the water, and with the other elements nurturing and becoming a piece of land that is inhabitable by all beings. And when I hear, like I say, you're rendering, I think of the Homer spit. And at the time, it happened at a very, that realization for me happened at a time when I was grieving over the death of my baby brother a few years ago. And it helped me to understand that the grief that I was experiencing for him was also an ancestral grief, and the grief for my lost mother and my lost father. And I was so grateful to be able to have again a different understanding and a different meaning of what it means to be lifted with or lifted through the mud.
On the topic of mud, yeah, so when we were talking about skillful effort and came up with that mud analogy and all the positive, yeah, I too celebrated that. And it reminded me on the way here, you know, it's just, I mean, it's dry in California. And so part of going through an area, it's marshy most of the time, but right now it's very dry. So underneath there is salt, which we also need, right, to live. And then also so much of the world, the area as a marsh also filters the water and cleans it for us. And so again, just so much of practice is, to me, very much reframing what seems awful, difficult, into ways that we can manage and into ways that is transformative. So, yeah. And to me, in some ways, the practice is to focus on the third noble truth, right? How can it end, and to gain confidence in that. And to me, that's the good news that suffering can end, right? And so the good news of Buddhism is the third noble truth, right? So, and so much of that again is seeing conditions clearly and being able to work with it, not outside of it.
So thinking of seeing conditions clearly, then, you know, like I have I have anxiety, and, you know, so it spurs up, and then you combine that with ADHD, and so then you get like anxiousness with a chatty mind that is hard to settle. And so I have kind of this go-to to kind of quiet my mind so that I can appreciate my practice and kind of delve back into things. And so I'll kind of say to myself over and over again, I'm okay, it's okay, Namo Amida Butsu. And I'll just kind of do that over and over and over again until I can kind of settle my mind to be able to kind of get back into what I need to get back into. Do you guys have like go-to sort of practices or things that you do to kind of quiet your mind, settle yourself, so that maybe you can delve into deeper practice that kind of reveals those sorts of things, that reminds us of this sort of non-duality and all that the Dharma has to offer us?
Thank you. I mentioned it briefly, but let me mention it again, how deeply important my practice of walking meditation is. I've come to know it as, you know, some people have difficulty with sitting, you know, or they feel antsy or whatever. And that's not to cast an aspersion. It's just a reality. We all have different things. And I can sit, but I much prefer what I call stillness in motion. Because oddly enough, the act of walking mindfully on the earth, every step, being aware of every step, being aware of every breath. And recently, with this challenge with my body and walking after hiking up mountains in Cappadocia, Turkey, and then down in Peru, wow, I was watching every step. And I was watching the terrain. And I felt like the practice deepened for me because every little slope, if this is flat, the little bit slope could cause me a little muscle strain. Oh my goodness. At first I was fearful, but then I realized, no, I can do this. There are ways to walk. I was backing on, the littlest hill. And I was really grateful that I had had that practice, because had I not, when my body was challenged, I wouldn't have been able to notice something that I felt I should have noticed 4 years ago, where I live on a slope, on a little bit of a hill. And it got completely by me, by my mind. Didn't get by my body, but it got by my mind. And so I'm really grateful now to be able to have, as I call it, stillness emotion.
I think for me, I like to say I'm an recovering perfectionist. So, in part, why skillful effort comes up often for me, and so I recently sat a 3-week retreat in an insight tradition and had a lot of physical pain, which to a certain point, I tend to overcome it with concentration, and didn't, and in a long retreat, you go up and down anyways, but mine seemed to be a deep plunge and then just a lot of like shallow pain. And I found both contentment and equanimity in it. So that really has helped me to have the sense that the awareness is the thing that is the settling. Not, we keep focusing on what we're aware of, and how it should be. What we define, we have ideas of this is calming, this is good, this is positive, and yet it's the awareness that is this, for me, what I realize is brings the equanimity and the contentness. And also the really hard word for this one, the acceptance or allowing for things to be as they are, that also, and to rest in the awareness is what is really stabilizing. So again, the processes and the how versus the objects of what, yeah. And I also say that, again, because I'm an over-efforter, that it was an aha for me, maybe for some of you it won't be, but a big aha for me was sometimes I think, when I'm present, I will be relaxed. And then I realized, when I'm more relaxed, it's easier to be present. And that was like a big aha.
So I can turn to maybe one of the questions, or a combination of the questions that came in. I feel like in several of the questions, one of the themes had to do with emotions. And Sister Peace, I feel like you spoke really beautifully to how you're recognizing the emotions you're experiencing. And a thread through some of these questions is, should we be shutting down our emotions in this period of time and becoming more maybe solutions oriented? And it sort of related to that, if we do turn to our emotions, how do we channel or engage emotions like frustration or anger through the lens of our Buddhist practice? So specifically, how does one express anger and frustration with a ahimsa in mind?
Thank you for that beautiful investigation, I'd say. You know what? I find I am most challenged. The hardest thing to do is what my beloved sister, Reverend Lien, just said. We have to relax. And how do we relax? How do I relax? How many times did I hear my beloved teacher, Tai, and Sister Chan Kong, and so many others say, breathe. It is as simple as breathing, and that our breath brings us back to ourselves. And I have found that with practice, not only does the breath bring me back to myself, but it brings my mind back, you see. And for me, an analogy is a kite with a string. And, there we are with the kite, and we're inevitably, it's a windy day, and maybe we're near some trees. And what happens? The kite, the mind gets stuck in the trees. And wow, then what do? How do we get the mind unstuck? And it's right there in our hands. What are we holding? What's holding the kite, the mind, to the body? Breath. The breath. And I love to have things in pictures or some short thing because it's easier for me to remember. So by concentrating on my breathing, I'm doing a couple of things. I am relaxing. I'm coming back to myself. I'm having capacity to then very gently, the breath is bringing the mind back to the body. It's very gently coming back. It's returning. And another practice that I actually learned from a couple of medicine men and shamans who I've practiced and taught with, and who I've learned so much for. What they suggest is call all yourselves back. Like, what? Call all yourselves. What are all the names we go by? My grandma called me Princess. I was named after an aunt. So, I call myself by that name, and I call myself by my legal name. And I call myself by my Vietnamese monastic name, Sister Anyam, and I call myself by the name I go by now more than not is Sister Peace. And I call them all back. I call those parts of myself back. And these could be parts that we really love, and these could be parts that, well, we've had challenges with, but we still want those parts of ourselves to come back to ourselves, to come back home, so that we can hold and take care of, and they can help take care of us.
I think the first thing that I consider in this question is the word should. That that might be the initial pitfall, is because we think that we should do certain things, that we should shut down our emotions, or we shouldn't shut down our emotions. And I think that that's something that each of us kind of has to explore for ourselves too, is like, why do I feel like I'm not allowed to have certain emotions? And I think that for those that participate in seated meditation, when these intrusive thoughts come forward, we kind of acknowledge that they're there and let them slide by. But I do think that there's a point where, when we're ready to, we need to let that frustration kind of come to us, and we need to investigate it. I think that that's how we need to have a quizzical mind in Buddhism, because we need to see where in our formation is this feeling coming from. Is it triggering something else that's deeper, that is undealt with? And this is the way in which our passions continue to come up, is because they're connected to so many different things. One starts here and then it works its way down. I talk a lot about anger in my Dharma talks, because my family has a history of anger. And as I've, worked through that so that I don't have an explosive temper, I've had to come to more of the roots of it, and find that like it was a familial thing. And then, maybe frustration or anger or hurt, it's just getting to something deeper within ourselves that's going on. And that's what Buddhism reveals to us, is who we are, much deeper, a deeper understanding. So I would encourage you to let go of the word should, and to, when you have the space and the time, and especially the mental space and the heart space, let those emotions arise up. We don't have to act out on them. We don't have to, smack anybody or anything like that. But it's good for us to acknowledge it, to sit with it, to understand where it's coming from, so that the next time it arises, we can potentially move through it quicker. Because I think by just letting it come up and pushing it away, we're going to keep coming back to it. It's going to keep rearing up. So that's kind of what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I appreciate both of your pointing towards the how again, right? Incrementally, one breath at a time in some ways. I think this, when we're in distress, we want to grasp at something that we can just cling on to. And so much of our practice is actually as I started, knowing things as they are. And what helps is one, in the Eightfold Path, and is that our values of the Four Noble Truths and understanding karma, and then also in the wisdom part is our thinking, which is really motivation. So I think, again, if we focus on what is our motivation for how we are with our emotions or how we are with others in activism, that carries a lot. It helps us to remember that even if this anger, am I meeting my anger, my emotion with kindness, acceptance, allowing for it, and being able, this is why so much of seated meditation, as I know it, is about learning to identify clearly. So if you want to let go, I like to say, right, this is your mind or your heart or your body. This is stress, and stress is solid and tight, and it feels like it's not going to stop or end. And so if we can identify clearly sensations, emotions right now, thoughts right now, and also our patterns of thinking, as you were talking about, like what are habitual patterns of doing with this, and then there's the field of awareness itself of those and then we practice cultivating certain states. That's the other useful thing about Buddhism. It's not a passive practice. In the popular mindfulness industry, it might have that sense, I'm just here, non-judgmental, and that's all there is to it, and then everything else would take care of itself. But no, this practice is, there's wholesome, for a while I was like, oh, I'm not into wholesome, and unwholesome is too judgmental. But more and more I practice, it just really feels like, yeah. So, and this is the time to focus on wholesome, on skillful, on appropriate, on useful. And I think how we do that, and I would say this is a good time also to lean into your practice by doing something together, taking a course, joining a sangha, doing a program, because it helps to give us the container, right? This is the time to do that. And then the other thing I would say is that as you pointed towards, Reverend Opel, like curiosity, I think is another way of reframing not knowing. Most of us, when we not know, we're like, freak out, right? But really, not knowing is possibility. And I think that's actually really important for the activism, because so much, I was watching the news like mad on Tuesday night, right? And so many of the people are like, right? We don't understand how to read this data, or Wednesday too, right? Like, and it's been going on since 2016. Things are not coming up the way we thought they would and understand. And so we need to, and so our response also needs to be different. I talked to a friend and they're like, this is their take, right? People are writing postcards. You don't do that anymore, And so we do actually need to get together and talk to each other and ask, because context makes all the difference. What might work in one community won't work in somewhere else. And so again, we need to really come together, listen to each other, and come up with ways together to meet the condition where things are. So that takes not knowing, that takes entering with, yeah, you might have some ideas, you might have some aspiration, but how do we together, find a solution in context? So that's the other piece.
For that, Reverend Lien. I feel like you've sort of addressed a couple of the questions that have come in through the chat about, this is an opportunity to reset and respond differently than maybe we did in 2016, and how to support communities of which maybe some of us are not a part of, but want to support. So I appreciate that very much. Anything else that the group would want to speak to around community engagement, supporting other groups, ways for our listeners or attendees today to maybe tap into some more of that engagement?
Yeah, I recall one of the questions that you had gotten early, specifically asked like, oh, what exactly should I do? Like the postcard writing. And the one thing that I feel like we want to, it's good to do things that make us uncomfortable. I think it's a way that we grow and we learn. But I also think that it's important to lean into our talents and the ways in which our causes and conditions have given us certain abilities and maybe you could say gifts. So, if you are a wonderful letter writer or you love to write postcards, maybe that is the offering that you give, and to give yourself permission to say that is enough. We know that in Buddhism, even the smallest of seeds can give us so much. When we think about Gotami, and when she was visiting all of the different families in her grief, it was this little seed, that she sees, and that understanding of everybody suffers, all families have loss. It's these small acts of just talking with other human beings, that doesn't, maybe we sit back and go, oh, it's not big enough. It's not big enough. This is such a big problem. And the way that I think that we can deal with that is to lean into the things that make sense for us to do. And then I agree with Reverend Leanne, like getting together with folks and like talking as a sangha, and other people that want to kind of walk down this and I want to do something path is great, that you're going to find ideas that you can do together. But I think that we have to be careful not to place those shoulds that I was talking about before onto others. And we have to kind of understand that we all express ourselves differently. And so whether we want to be very far out on the advocacy sort of side, we should encourage and help people do that. It's a great way to spread the message of the embrace of the Buddha. But if people are not able to do that, it's kind of the same. We have to understand that they might have reasons for that, or things that make it maybe more unsafe for them to do certain things. We have a number of ministers that come from Japan, and they're not able to get engaged in certain things as easily as maybe somebody like myself could, because they could have their visa pulled, right? So there's always factors that people have that don't allow them to maybe move forward in the way that we think that they should. So to also have patience with our community if it's not responding in the way that we wish they would.
Maybe I'll just add one more piece about the how. I think the precepts are practices that are really there for us when we're shaken. And so they're really great to investigate on what are what were we taught about how these are, and then what is our habitual ways of responding, because most of us in terms of shoulds, and most of us are most people in my experience in the West, when you talk about precepts in Buddhism, they go, oh, right? And whereas in Soto Zen, you get Dharma transmission to give the precepts. In that same retreat, I realized, wow, how grateful I am that my whole life, I did not, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a fighter pilot, join the Navy and become, or the Air Force and become, because I like speed, right? I did not think priest or religious person. That was so far from my list of, what I wanted to be. And yet here I am. And so also, I think just having a sense of what is it that gives you a sense of safety and protection, right? That's one of the fundamental purpose of the precepts, and not just for yourself, but for others. And also part of, at least in our tradition of the precepts, is very public. And everyone's invited when you take the vow. And the vow is both, making vow, I think, and maybe it's because I'm so Zen, but making vow is so important because it's a sense of commitment. I heard a little Instagram thing that my girlfriend sent to me, or forwarded to me, where, some people talk about hope and like, I hope things will happen like this, and I hope things will happen like that. And it's very like ephemeral, where for this indigenous person, hope is a commitment. Hope is a vow. And so I think this is another way that we can, the attitude of how we approach this, my vow, because if you have this vow in the precepts or your rudder, then skillful speech, skillful ways of not harming, skillful ways of not lying, skillful ways of not stealing, and intoxication, because I could get intoxicated by my fear, I can intoxicated by my anger, I can intoxicated by wanting to change the world, and yet I haven't looked at myself and changed the hate and greed in me, so it's so important to really investigate those and understand them, because we all have been taught values, so we need to examine them, and what is the way that we express them now, I think is really important. How do we express them together too? Because that also supports us when we face others that we don't care for or find oppositional. And it gives us pause, right? So we connect more skillfully.
Thank you, Reverend. I agree that, especially with one particular thing that you say about compassionate speech, because it's not just compassionate speech to others, but it's compassionate speech to self. And I found that's a huge practice for me. I can be lovingly speaking and embracing and with meaning and meaning it with all my heart. But I'm not always as compassionate with myself. And so for me, the opportunity to be able to listen deeply and compassionately to myself, speak, compassionately to myself, and all the things that the precepts, teach us to do. Often we think in terms of others. It's also for us. And I'm just grateful to hear you say that as a reminder to myself.
Thank you so much for that, Sister Peace. And I think that is a beautiful way to wrap this part of our Buddhist community gathering and actually bring us to our closing. And so again, I want to thank all of you, and I want to invite Reverend Melissa Opel to offer merit and lead us in Gasho.
If you'll please put your hands together. In consideration of all the bodhisattvas that we meet in our life and the ways in which we hope to be a bodhisattva for others, I would like to offer the bodhisattva vow. However innumerable beings are, I vow to meet them with kindness and interest. However inexhaustible the states of suffering are, I vow to touch them with patience and love. However immeasurable the dharmas are, I vow to explore them deeply. However incomparable the mystery of interbeing, I vow to surrender to it freely. Namo Mirabutsu. Namo Mirabutsu. Namandats. Namandats. Namandats.
Thank you so much, Reverend Opal. And again, thank you to our Dharma teachers. I feel very re-energized and inspired and reminded that there is compassion and love and community that exists, and that we can return to that whenever we need it. We have these spaces. We've put in the chat a couple of links for our Dharma teachers. So if you wanted to engage with them in the future or wanted to learn more about them, you can access that information. I wanted to send a reminder that we will email out a link to the recording of today's event. We wanted to thank everyone that offered donations. We will put a donation link in the chat box. We do thank our Dharma teachers within Ore, so anything you can contribute is appreciated. And everyone is welcome to join the Vista Buddhist Temple's Sunday services, our Wednesday meditation, our Dharma recovery. We offer a variety of different ways to engage with the Jodo Shinshu community, especially if you're in the North County, San Diego area. So again, thank you all for attending today. I hope you were as inspired as many of us on the planning committee, I'm sure are. And I hope you have a really beautiful and wonderful weekend. Thank you again. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your presence. Thank you for the practice.
Hugs to everyone. And whoever this is for you, holding your hand in your face.